Imagine, if you will, the early autumn of 1922. The air, crisp and invigorating, carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant chimes of church bells across New Brunswick, New Jersey. It was a Sunday, traditionally reserved for tranquility, for reflection, for the simple rituals of small-town American life. Families stirred, anticipating leisurely brunches, solemn morning services, or just a peaceful afternoon. Children, oblivious, chased shadows in sun-dappled yards, their laughter a harmonious counterpoint to a world still clinging to innocence. Everything on the surface whispered of peace. But often, in such moments of serene illusion, profound horrors take root. Beneath this veneer of idyllic calm, a terrifying darkness had already coalesced, a malevolent force preparing to violently tear through that community's peace, leaving a wound to fester, unhealed, for over a century. On this very day, in a secluded, overgrown lover's lane, shrouded by sycamore trees, an unspeakable act was unfolding. A brutal tableau of betrayal about to be discovered that would not only shock an entire generation, but irrevocably scar the landscape of American true crime, solidifying its place as one of the nation's most enduring, perplexing, historical cold cases. This was not merely a crime, it was a detonation, sending shockwaves through the polite society of the Roaring Twenties, revealing a hidden underbelly of passion, deceit, and murder. This isn't merely a forgotten footnote from dusty archives. This is the Hall Mills murder, a name, in its time, synonymous with scandal, injustice, and the raw drama of human depravity. It was a case so sensationally bizarre, so utterly drenched in intrigue and societal hypocrisy, it eclipsed even the most salacious headlines of its era, captivating a nation weary from war. At its heart lay a prominent Episcopal pastor, the Reverend Edward Hall, and his beautiful, married choir singer, Eleanor Mills. Two individuals found side by side, brutally murdered, their bodies arranged in a chilling tableau of illicit love and violent death. The players read like a cast from a Gothic novel, a jilted, powerful wife, a family steeped in influence, and a parade of eccentric, often contradictory witnesses. For weeks, the story dominated every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every hushed conversation. It was a cultural phenomenon, a true crime saga that exposed society's seedy underbelly, dragging respected figures through a public, humiliating mudbath. Yet despite the initial explosive impact, chaotic investigations, sensational trials, and endless public speculation, the truth, the unvarnished, undeniable truth, remained infuriatingly elusive. A century has now woven its intricate tapestry over those grim events. The original witnesses, those who might have held a fragment of the answer, are long silenced by time. The original crime scenes have vanished beneath layers of development and forgetfulness. The sensational newspaper clippings, once vibrant, have yellowed, crumbled, their ink fading like ghosts. But the questions, the chilling, persistent, unanswered questions still resonate, a haunting echo across the decades. Who precisely committed this horrific double murder? Was it, as many suspected, the scorned and powerful wife, Frances Hall, driven to homicidal rage? Or was it a jealous relative, a rival suitor, or perhaps someone entirely unexpected, whose motive remains buried deep within the past? The silence surrounding the ultimate truth of the Hall Mills murders is not merely deafening, it is a profound testament. A testament either to a meticulously cunning killer or a devastating indictment of a legal system that, in its most crucial moments, utterly failed to deliver justice. It's a silence that has persisted, unbroken, for over 100 years, an aching void that demands to be filled. And it is this very silence, this enduring mystery, that we are here to confront, to dissect, to illuminate. Welcome, astute investigators and true crime aficionados, to Crime Vault USA. Here, our mission extends beyond mere storytelling. We resurrect history's most compelling enigmas. We meticulously dust off forgotten files, carefully re-examine ambiguous evidence, and endeavor to breathe vivid life back into the mysteries that have shaped America's criminal landscape and continue to haunt our collective imagination. Today, we extend a personal invitation. Join us on an immersive, visceral journey back to the turbulent Roaring Twenties, to an era where jazz pulsed, prohibition created an underworld, and a brutal double murder reverberated through the very soul of a nation. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to plunge headfirst into one of America's most compelling and arguably its most confounding historical cold cases, the Hall-Mills murders. A narrative of forbidden love, ruthless betrayal, and an enduring quest for truth. This is an untold story, a lingering shadow, and a truth still waiting to be unearthed. Allow us to guide you. Let the investigation begin.
New Brunswick, New Jersey. The year is 1922. A town woven from the fabric of American small-town ideals, where church bells chime with steady rhythm, setting the moral compass. And secrets, if they existed, were meant to stay buried deep beneath the surface of manicured lawns and polite smiles. Here, respectability wasn't just a virtue, it was the very cornerstone of existence. And at the heart of this seemingly idyllic community stood the St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church, a beacon of faith guided by a man held in the highest esteem, Reverend Edward Hall. Reverend Hall was, by all accounts, a pillar of his community, a spiritual shepherd with a commanding presence and an eloquence that captivated his congregation. His sermons were powerful, his counsel sought, his very image one of unimpeachable piety. He was a man of impressive stature, not just physically, but morally, or so it appeared. Born into a prominent family with a distinguished education, he had married Frances Stevens Hall, a woman of considerable wealth and social standing, solidifying his position within New Brunswick's elite. Their home on Franklin Street was a testament to their prosperity and their commitment to the church, a vibrant hub of social and charitable activity. Reverend Hall's life was an open book, or so everyone believed, reflecting the values of an era that prized order, tradition, and rigid adherence to societal norms. His days were filled with parish duties, community engagement, and the comforting routine of a man whose life was dedicated to God and his flock. Yet, beneath this meticulously constructed facade of rectitude and public service, a dangerous current ran, threatening to shatter not just his world, but the very moral foundation of the town itself. For Reverend Hall harbored a secret, one that whispered of forbidden passions and clandestine meetings, a secret that wore the alluring face of one of his own choir members, Eleanor Mills. Eleanor Mills was not a woman of great social standing or immense wealth, but she possessed a different kind of richness. She was a vibrant, expressive woman, with a clear, melodic voice that soared above the St. John's choir, drawing the admiration of congregants and, crucially, the attention of her pastor. Younger than the Reverend, married to James Mills, the church sexton, Eleanor was a woman who navigated the social strictures of the 1920s with a certain captivating grace.
She was known for her vivacious spirit, her stylish dress, and the undeniable warmth she exuded. Her life, too, revolved around the church, her voice an integral part of its weekly services, her presence a comforting constant. Her home, a modest dwelling not far from the church, was where she raised her two children, a seemingly ordinary existence punctuated by her extraordinary talent and undeniable charm. But like the Reverend Hall, Eleanor too carried a clandestine burden. For the professional relationship between the revered pastor and his talented choir singer had long ago blurred the lines of propriety, transforming into a fervent illicit affair. It began subtly, perhaps with shared glances across the choir loft, prolonged conversations after rehearsals, discussions that lingered on spiritual matters before drifting into personal confessions, shared vulnerabilities. The church, meant to be a sanctuary, became an unwitting stage for their dangerous dance. Their shared passion for music, their proximity in the hallowed halls, the intimate nature of their roles within the congregation all contributed to the slow, insidious growth of an attraction that defied every moral and social code of their time. The thrill of the forbidden, the intensity of shared secrets, fanned the flames of their desires, pulling them deeper into a clandestine world hidden from the watchful eyes of New Brunswick. For months, perhaps even years, they met in hushed whispers, exchanging letters laced with longing, stealing moments away from their respective spouses, away from their public lives, driven by a powerful, consuming love that dared not speak its name. This was more than a fleeting indiscretion. It was a deeply entangled emotional bond, one that promised both intoxicating pleasure and the potential for utter ruin. Each clandestine meeting, each stolen kiss, each whispered endearment was a step further into a dangerous abyss where discovery meant not just personal disgrace, but the shattering of an entire community's trust, the implosion of careers, and the public shaming of lives once held as exemplars. They were two respectable figures caught in the grip of an unforgivable sin, their lives interwoven by a secret so potent, so volatile, it was destined to explode. New Brunswick's secret, the forbidden love between Reverend Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills, was a ticking time bomb, silently counting down to a brutal, inexplicable end that would forever scar the quiet town and etch their names into the annals of one of America's most perplexing historical cold cases.
October 14th, 1922. The crisp autumn air of New Brunswick, New Jersey held the promise of a peaceful Saturday morning. But beneath the sycamore tree, in a secluded spot infamously known as Lover's Lane, that peace was about to be savagely, irrevocably shattered. What lay hidden there would unleash a scandal so explosive, so laced with illicit passion and brutal violence, that it would captivate a nation and remain unsolved for a century. This was no ordinary tragedy. This was a meticulously staged tableau of murder, a whispered secret violently brought to light, an enigma that would haunt generations. It began innocently enough. Two teenagers, 18-year-old Raymond Schneider and 16-year-old Pearl Balmer, seeking to retrieve a kite that had fallen into a field adjacent to the secluded lane, stumbled upon a sight that would forever brand itself into their memories. Not the kite, but something far more sinister. There, beneath the tree, were two bodies. One, a man, lay on his back, his head turned grotesquely to the side. The other, a woman, lay face down, her left arm extended, as if reaching out in a final, desperate plea. The world, for these two young people, shrank to the horror before them, a chilling tableau that screamed of betrayal and death. The man was Dr. Edward Wheeler Hall, a prominent, respected rector of the Church of St. John the Evangelist. His body was found with a calling card placed deliberately at his feet, almost like a macabre signature. The woman, identified later as Mrs. Eleanor Mills, a choir singer from Hall's own church, lay beside him. Both had been shot in the head. Hall, once a figure of spiritual authority, was now a victim of brutal violence, his fedora resting neatly over his face as if to shield him from the world's judgment, even in death. Mills, her throat slit from ear to ear, suffered an even more gruesome end, a silent testament to a frenzied, savage attack. Her hand rested on Hall's shoulder, a final, tender, yet horrifying embrace. Near them, 4 love letters, torn into pieces, lay scattered, whispering tales of a clandestine affair now tragically exposed. These were not random victims. This was a narrative, violently enacted for all to see, a profound statement of passion and ultimate vengeance. Word spread like wildfire through the quiet, respectable community of New Brunswick. The discovery ripped through the town's polite facade, exposing raw nerves and igniting a firestorm of gossip. A pillar of the church, a married man, found dead with a married choir singer? The scandal was unprecedented. The local police, unaccustomed to such a sensational and brutal crime, were immediately overwhelmed. The scene, poorly preserved, quickly became a morbid spectacle for curious onlookers. Crucial evidence was potentially compromised even before a proper investigation could begin. The very air of Lover's Lane, once a whispered secret for clandestine rendezvous, now throbbed with a dark, palpable dread. The initial response was a chaotic scramble, a testament to a force ill-equipped for a murder mystery of this magnitude, let alone one that would soon ensnare the highest echelons of society. The bizarre circumstances surrounding the murders only deepened the enigma. Why place the calling card? Why tear the love letters but leave them at the scene? Was this a crime of passion or something far more calculated? As investigators fumbled, a host of peculiar characters began to emerge, each claiming a piece of the puzzle, each adding a new layer of confusion. Amongst them, one figure stood out: Jane Gibson, a peculiar woman known locally as the Pig Woman. Her nickname derived from her profession, raising pigs in a ramshackle shack located dangerously close to Lover's Lane. Jane Gibson was a figure of local notoriety, eccentric and often contradictory. Yet her proximity to the crime scene made her an indispensable, if unreliable, witness. She claimed to have heard gunshots and cries of help on the night of the murders. Peering through the darkness, she saw a group of people near the sycamore tree. She described a woman, whom she later identified as Mrs. Hall, the deceased rector's wife, arguing vehemently with a man. She spoke of a short, fat man and another tall, thin man present, adding further suspects to the unfolding drama. Gibson initially testified that she witnessed the killing, claiming to have heard 4 distinct shots and screams. She even alleged to have seen the group shining a flashlight into the victims' faces. Her story, delivered with a strange mix of conviction and theatricality, painted a vivid, if somewhat fantastical picture of the events of that fateful night. Her account was, for many, the closest thing to an eyewitness statement the police had. However, the Pig Woman's testimony was a double-edged sword. While providing a crucial narrative, it was riddled with inconsistencies, shifting details, and outright contradictions. Her descriptions of the perpetrators varied. Her timeline often failed to align with other sparse pieces of evidence. At times, she claimed to have seen everything. At others, her memory seemed to falter, clouded by the dark, or perhaps by something more sinister. Was she a brave witness, genuinely trying to assist? Or an opportunist seeking notoriety? Or even worse, a pawn in a larger, more elaborate cover-up? The very foundation of the early investigation rested precariously on her shifting sands of truth. Her story, though captivating, created as many questions as it answered, entangling the case in a dense web of conflicting accounts and whispered suspicions. It would become clear that in this tangled narrative of forbidden love and brutal murder, truth itself was as elusive as a shadow in the moonlight, twisting and turning with every new revelation, every new lie. The tranquil air of September 1922 in New Brunswick, New Jersey, was shattered not just by the discovery of two brutally murdered bodies, but by the immediate, chilling realization of who the victims were. Reverend Edward Hall, a prominent Episcopal clergyman, and Eleanor Mills, a beloved choir singer. But the real earthquake was yet to come, as the tremor of suspicion began to ripple through the town, not towards some shadowy outsider, but straight into the heart of its most prominent, untouchable families. Who would dare harm a man of God and his choir singer, found under a crabapple tree in such a scandalous, intimate embrace? The answer, whispered amongst the fearful, the gossiping, and the secretly vengeful, was clear. Those closest to them. Those whose lives were irrevocably intertwined by privilege, passion, and profound secrets. Before the last vestiges of dew had evaporated from the crime scene, the gaze of the fledgling investigation, clumsy and overwhelmed as it was, settled upon a formidable figure, Mrs. Frances Noel Stevens Hall, Reverend Edward Hall's wife. To call her a society matron would be a profound understatement. Frances was a pillar of New Brunswick aristocracy, a woman whose lineage traced back to the very founders of the city, whose wealth flowed like an unseen river beneath the cobblestone streets, shaping everything from political appointments to charity balls. Her public demeanor was one of dignified sorrow, a grief-stricken widow, but behind the veil of propriety lay a woman of immense pride, a possessive spirit, and a reputation fiercely guarded. How could she, a woman of such standing, respond to the public humiliation of her husband's sordid affair, laid bare in the most gruesome possible way? The motive of jealousy, raw and searing, hung heavy in the air around her, thick as the September fog. And Frances was not alone. Flanking her were her formidable brothers, Henry and Willie Stevens. These were men forged in the same crucible of privilege and power, loyal to their sister with an almost unshakable ferocity. Henry Stevens, the elder, was a man of calculated influence, a master of strategy, accustomed to getting his way through quiet intimidation or overt leverage. Willie Stevens, younger and often described as more impulsive, was known for his quick temper and unwavering devotion to Frances. Imagine the scene, the family's grand mansion, a fortress of old money and influence, becoming the focal point of a murder investigation. The local law enforcement, largely composed of men who had grown up under the benevolent yet firm shadow of the Stevens family, found themselves in an unprecedented predicament. How do you question the very people who, for generations, have held the keys to your town's prosperity and power? The Stevens brothers were not just concerned siblings, they were guardians of a dynasty, and the scandal threatened to dismantle everything their family had built. Their motive, not just protecting Frances, but protecting the unblemished facade of the Stevens name itself, an entity more valuable than any individual life to them. Further entwined in this familial web was their cousin, Henry Delarue. Less prominent than the Stevens brothers, Delarue was nevertheless a trusted confidant, a loyal auxiliary in the family's sphere of influence. He was often seen in the company of the brothers, a shadow perhaps, but one capable of wielding a certain authority on their behalf. What was his role in the family's protective circle? Was he merely a witness to their actions, or an active participant in the desperate measures taken to control the narrative, and perhaps the truth? But the questions, the chilling, persistent, unanswered questions, still resonate, a haunting echo across the decades. Who precisely committed this horrific double murder? Was it, as many suspected, the scorned and powerful wife, Frances Hall, driven to homicidal rage? Or was it a jealous relative, a rival suitor, or perhaps someone entirely unexpected, whose motive remains buried deep within the past? The silence surrounding the ultimate truth of the Hall Mills murders is not merely deafening, it is a profound testament. a testament either to a meticulously cunning killer or a devastating indictment of a legal system that, in its most crucial moments, utterly failed to deliver justice. It's a silence that has persisted, unbroken, for over 100 years, an aching void that demands to be filled. And it is this very silence, this enduring mystery, that we are here to confront, to dissect, to illuminate. Welcome, astute investigators and true crime aficionados, to Crime Vault USA. Here, our mission extends beyond mere storytelling. We resurrect history's most compelling enigmas. We meticulously dust off forgotten files, carefully re-examine ambiguous evidence, and endeavor to breathe vivid life back into the mysteries that have shaped America's criminal landscape and continue to haunt our collective imagination. Today, we extend a personal invitation. Join us on an immersive, visceral journey back to the turbulent Roaring Twenties, to an era where jazz pulsed, prohibition created an underworld, and a brutal double murder reverberated through the very soul of a nation. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to plunge headfirst into one of America's most compelling and arguably its most confounding historical cold cases, the Hall-Mills murders. A narrative of forbidden love, ruthless betrayal, and an enduring quest for truth. This is an untold story, a lingering shadow, and a truth still waiting to be unearthed. Allow us to guide you. Let the investigation begin.
Each of these individuals, Francis, Henry, Willie, and Henry de la Rue, represented a formidable challenge to any legitimate investigation. They moved within a world where rules bent for them, where discretion was often bought, and where the word of a Stevens carried more weight than any material evidence. The initial days following the discovery of the bodies were a chaotic testament to the power of the Hall and Stevens families. Law enforcement, led by local prosecutor Joseph E. Stricker, found themselves navigating a minefield. The crime scene itself, surprisingly, was not immediately secured with the rigor one might expect for such a high-profile case. Spectators, reporters, and even the curious public were allowed to trample through, potentially contaminating or destroying vital clues. This laxity wasn't necessarily malice. It was a consequence of inexperience and perhaps a subconscious deference to the town's elite. But it set a dangerous precedent, making the collection of forensic evidence, a nascent science at the time, even more challenging. New Brunswick was a town where everyone knew everyone, and the social hierarchy was as rigid as the laws of physics. The Stevens family sat at the very apex. Their homes were palatial, their connections ran to the highest echelons of state government, and their financial influence touched every major institution, from the local bank to the church itself. To accuse one of them, let alone the matriarch and her powerful brothers, of a double murder was an act of unthinkable temerity. The local police, many of whom owed their positions directly or indirectly to the Stevens sway, were caught in an impossible bind. How could they impartially investigate suspects who were, in essence, their benefactors? The very foundation of justice seemed to waver under the immense pressure exerted by this entrenched power.
The air in New Brunswick, thick with unspoken deference, made every step of the investigation feel like walking on eggshells. Every interview was conducted with an unspoken awareness of who they were speaking to. Every piece of information was filtered through the prism of social standing, creating a pervasive sense of apprehension among those tasked with finding the truth. The public, while initially shocked, soon found itself divided. Some murmured about the audacity of the Stevens family, daring to believe that such prominent figures could be involved in so heinous an act. Others, fiercely loyal or simply intimidated, dismissed the suspicions as unthinkable slander against New Brunswick's most respected citizens. This societal split only added to the pressure on the investigators, who faced not just a complex crime, but a community deeply invested in protecting its own myths of prosperity and moral rectitude. The motives were clear in their brutality and simplicity: jealousy and the desperate need to protect a tarnished family name. But the execution, shrouded in the darkness of a lonely lane, suggested a calculated, perhaps even cold-blooded act. Was it an explosive fit of rage from a wronged wife, or a deliberate, coordinated effort by an entire family to silence a scandal that threatened to unravel their carefully constructed world? The questions were agonizing. Frances's reputation, already wounded by her husband's infidelity, faced utter ruin if the full extent of the scandal became public. For the Stevens brothers, it wasn't just about Frances, it was about the family's legacy, their standing in a society where honor and respectability were currency. The murder, grotesque as it was, could be seen as a desperate, misguided attempt to preserve that very currency, to bury the scandal along with the bodies. The immediate aftermath of the Hall Mills murders was not just a criminal investigation, it was a societal earthquake that exposed the fault lines of power, class, and justice in early 20th century America. The initial targeting of Frances Noel Hall and her brothers, Henry and Willie, along with their cousin, Henry de la Rue, was not merely a procedural step, it was a declaration of war against an entrenched elite. But law enforcement, hobbled by their own limitations, the subtle and overt pressures from the Stevens empire, and the sheer audacity of the crime, found themselves outmatched from the very beginning. The prime suspects, cloaked in their immense wealth and influence, presented an almost impenetrable barrier to the truth. And as the initial days bled into weeks, the window for a swift and conclusive resolution began to close, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a chilling testament to how power can twist the very pursuit of justice.
In the annals of American crime, some cases merely make headlines. Others, like the Hall Mills murders, explode, leaving an indelible stain on the public consciousness, only to simmer for years before erupting into a judicial firestorm so intense it would forever be etched as the trial of the century. Imagine a stage, not of velvet curtains and spotlights, but of cold, hard justice. A stage where truth and deception danced a deadly tango. And the audience? The entire nation, captivated, horrified, and utterly transfixed. For 4 long years, the spectral figures of Reverend Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills haunted the quiet streets of New Brunswick, their brutal slaying a whispered secret, an open wound in the heart of a respectable community. The initial grand jury, held in the immediate aftermath of the murders in 1922, had been a confusing, frustrating affair. Local authorities, perhaps overwhelmed, perhaps intimidated by the influential social standing of some connected parties, struggled to piece together a coherent narrative. Conflicting testimonies, a chaotic crime scene, and a distinct lack of concrete evidence meant that despite the sensational nature of the double murder, no indictments were secured. The case, it seemed, was destined to fade. Another unsolved mystery swallowed by time, another injustice left to fester. But the public, particularly the yellow press, with its insatiable appetite for scandal, refused to let it die. The ghost of the pig woman, Mrs. Jane Gibson, a peculiar local farmer who claimed to have witnessed key events near the crime scene, loomed large in the background. Her strange, often contradictory accounts keeping the embers of suspicion glowing, even as the official investigation cooled. Then, in 1926, the embers burst into an inferno. A new wave of public outcry, fueled by a relentless campaign by William Randolph Hearst's Daily Mirror and its sensational journalist, Philip Payne, demanded that justice, delayed for so long, be finally served. Payne, a master of journalistic drama, promised to expose the truth behind the most shocking, most bewildering, most baffling mystery in the history of American crime. His relentless pursuit, often bordering on harassment, reignited the cold case with explosive force. New leads, or perhaps more accurately,
old leads re-examined under intense public pressure, emerged. The most potent catalyst was the re-emergence of Jane Gibson, the pig woman, now reportedly on her deathbed, ready to deliver a confession that would blow the lid off the entire affair. This time, her tale was more specific, more damning, and irrevocably pointed fingers at the highest echelons of the Hall family. The New Jersey legal system, once hesitant, now moved with a swift, almost vengeful urgency. A new grand jury was convened, and the spotlight, brighter than ever, illuminated the powerful and prominent. Jane Gibson, frail but resolute, was brought before them, often transported on a stretcher, her testimony a theatrical event in itself. She recounted seeing a woman she identified as Mrs. Frances Noel Hall, the Reverend's wife, along with her two brothers, Henry Carpenter and William Hall, near the murder site on the night of the killings. She described frantic whispers, a struggle, and the glint of a gun. Her story, despite its inherent inconsistencies and the growing doubts about her mental state, was enough. On the strength of her testimony, bolstered by circumstantial evidence and a fever pitch of public sentiment, indictments were handed down. Frances Noel Hall, the dignified wife, and her two brothers, socially prominent figures, were charged with murder. The entire nation gasped. A grand, opulent drama was about to unfold, a legal spectacle that would redefine American justice. The stage was set in the New Brunswick courthouse. Autumn of 1926, and the world descended upon this quiet New Jersey town. The trial was not merely a local affair, it was a national obsession, a veritable media circus that dwarfed anything seen before. Reporters from every major newspaper, telegraph wires humming with hourly updates, photographers clamoring for a glimpse of the accused, the scene was a kaleidoscope of flashing bulbs and shouted questions. Every detail, from the defendants' attire to their most fleeting expressions, was dissected, debated, and dramatized on front pages across the country.
This was trial by newspaper, where public opinion was forged not just in the courtroom, but in the glaring headlines and sensationalized narratives spun by competing journalists. Inside the packed courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, a suffocating blend of anticipation and morbid curiosity. The prosecution, led by Attorney General Edward L. Katzenbach, faced an immense challenge. 4 years had passed, evidence was sparse, and their star witness was, to put it mildly, unconventional. Their case hinged on a narrative of jealousy, social standing, and a desperate cover-up. They painted Frances Hall as a wronged wife, driven to a violent extreme by her husband's infidelity, aided by her fiercely protective brothers. The love letters between Reverend Hall and Eleanor Mills, once secret, were now public, read aloud in court, stripping bare the intimate details of their affair, providing a powerful, if circumstantial, motive. But the linchpin, the undeniable cornerstone of their entire argument, was Jane Gibson. Her testimony was the dramatic centerpiece. Her description of seeing the Hall siblings, her account of a struggle, her identification of Mrs. Hall's distinctive scarf. Yet her credibility was a gaping wound in the prosecution's armor. She rambled, contradicted herself, and her story shifted under pressure. Was she a fragile witness speaking her truth, or a confused woman, perhaps even a fabrication manipulated by the relentless press? Then came the defense, spearheaded by the formidable and charismatic attorney Robert H. McCarter. Their strategy was clear, brilliant, and utterly devastating: demolish Jane Gibson. McCarter methodically, relentlessly, and with the surgeon's precision, tore into her testimony. He exposed her inconsistencies, highlighted her shifting narratives, and cast profound doubt on her ability to accurately perceive events from 4 years prior, especially given her known health issues and eccentricities. He painted her not as a witness for justice, but as a pitiable, unreliable figure whose story was perhaps a product of her own imagination, or worse,
coerced by the very media that propelled her to fame. Beyond Gibson, the defense systematically attacked the prosecution's lack of physical evidence linking the Halls to the crime scene. Where was the weapon? Where were the bloodstains? Where was the irrefutable proof that tied these prominent individuals to the gruesome clandestine murders? Every day of the trial was a sensation. Packed galleries hung on every word, every cross-examination a gladiatorial combat. Experts testified, providing conflicting opinions on ballistics, toxicology, and the time of death, further muddying the waters. The raw emotions of the defendants, particularly Frances Hall, were under constant scrutiny. Her stoic demeanor, sometimes interpreted as cold indifference, other times as quiet resilience, fueled endless speculation. Did she appear guilty or unjustly persecuted? Public opinion, swayed by each day's headlines and the dramatic ebb and flow of testimony, shifted like the tides. One day, the Hall seemed undeniably guilty. The next, victims of a malicious press and a flawed justice system. The societal implications were profound. Was justice truly blind, or did wealth and social standing offer an impenetrable shield? The trial became a referendum on class, morality, and the very integrity of the American legal process. It was a spectacle that mirrored the nation's anxieties, laying bare the prejudices and fascinations of an era. Finally, after weeks of intense testimony, fiery rhetoric, and agonizing deliberation, the jury retired. The tension in the courthouse was palpable, almost suffocating. The nation held its breath. Then, the pronouncement, not guilty. A collective gasp, followed by a mix of stunned silence, quiet relief from the Hall supporters, and bitter disappointment from those who believed the wealthy had once again escaped justice. Frances Noel Hall and her brothers were acquitted. They walked free, but the shadows of suspicion, though legally dispelled, lingered stubbornly in the public imagination. The Hall Mills murders remained, and to this day, remain unsolved. The trial of the century had captivated a nation, exposed the sensationalism of the nascent tabloid press, and showcased the dramatic power of the courtroom. But in the end, it offered no definitive answers, only more questions, cementing its place as one of America's most enduring and perplexing cold cases. The stage lights dimmed, but the mystery remained, a chilling testament to the elusive nature of truth when shrouded in wealth, scandal, and the relentless glare of public scrutiny.
Imagine a crime so shocking, so brazen, that it ripped through the genteel facade of a small American town, leaving 2 bodies under a crabapple tree. But what if the true scandal wasn't just the brutal murders themselves, but the insidious corruption and bewildering incompetence that allowed the killers to walk free, leaving behind a chilling tapestry of unanswered questions? The Hall Mills murders, a saga born from illicit love and a brutal end, quickly spiraled into a labyrinth of inconsistencies, alleged police corruption, and political interference that continues to haunt American justice. This was not merely a failure to solve a case. It was a societal wound that exposed the raw power of wealth and influence, proving that some truths were simply too inconvenient to uncover. The very air around the crime scene seemed tainted, not just by death, but by a pervasive sense of dread and, quickly, suspicion. From the moment the bodies of Reverend Edward Hall and choir singer Eleanor Mills were discovered in September 1922, the investigation was plagued by an almost deliberate ineptitude. The crime scene itself, initially treated with appalling casualness, was practically an open house, with souvenir hunters allowed to trample over crucial evidence, forever blurring the lines of what might have been. Imagine it, a minister and a choir singer, dead, side by side, partially covered. The minister's love letter to his mistress neatly placed upon his body, an almost theatrical staging. Yet instead of forensic rigor, the scene was compromised, vital clues lost to the crush of curious onlookers, and what can only be described as a stunning lack of professional protocol.
This initial bungling was just the prelude to a far darker narrative. What emerged was a chilling pattern of crucial pieces of evidence that mysteriously disappeared or were shockingly mishandled, suggesting a deliberate effort to derail the pursuit of justice. The love letters themselves, pivotal to establishing motive, vanished and reappeared, their chain of custody irrevocably broken. Key witnesses gave conflicting testimonies, their stories shifting like sand dunes in the wind, only to be dismissed or championed based on what best suited the narrative of the powerful. Consider Jane Gibson, famously known as the Pig Woman, an eccentric, often drunk farmer, whose testimony placed members of the Hall family at the scene. Her accounts, though wildly inconsistent, held kernels of truth that, if properly investigated, might have cracked the case wide open. But her credibility was systematically attacked, her words twisted and dismissed, painting her as unreliable, even insane. Was she a victim of her own unreliability or a convenient scapegoat whose truth was too dangerous for certain circles? The deeper one delves, the more apparent it becomes that this was not a simple case of incompetence. This was a system under immense pressure, bending and breaking under the weight of social standing and political sway. The Hall family, pillars of the community, wealthy and influential, quickly became the primary suspects, particularly Mrs. Hall, the Reverend's scorned wife, and her two brothers, Henry and William Stevens. But their wealth and connections seemingly granted them an invisible shield. Local law enforcement, many whispered, were either too intimidated or too compromised to conduct a truly impartial investigation. Rumors of payoffs, threats, and backroom deals permeated the air, poisoning the public's faith in the very institutions designed to protect them. When the case finally reached trial, years after the murders, and largely due to the relentless pressure of the media mogul William Randolph Hearst, it was less a search for truth and more a theatrical spectacle. The prosecution struggled, hampered by the initial blunders, the compromised evidence, and the shifting testimonies. The defense, meanwhile, masterfully exploited every inconsistency, every doubt, painting the accused as victims of a sensationalized witch hunt. The trials of Mrs. Hall and her brothers became a circus, diverting attention from the cold, hard facts and focusing instead on character assassination and courtroom drama. Ultimately, despite compelling circumstantial evidence and the pervasive whispers of guilt, the Hall family members were acquitted, free.
The verdicts, though legally sound based on the presented evidence, left a gaping void in the public conscience. How could such a heinous crime go unpunished? The answer, many believed, lay in the insidious role of wealth and power. The Hall Mills murders became a stark reminder that in America, justice was not always blind. Sometimes it wore a blindfold woven from dollar bills and social status. Over the decades, various theories have emerged, each attempting to fill the vacuum left by the failed legal process. Was it indeed the vengeful Mrs. Hall and her brothers enacting a brutal retribution for a broken marriage? Or was there another, unknown party, perhaps a disgruntled parishioner or a lover of Eleanor Mills, pulling the strings from the shadows? Some pointed to the Ku Klux Klan, whose presence was strong in New Jersey at the time, as possibly involved in a moralistic reprisal, given the illicit nature of the affair. Each theory, however, remains forever hypothetical, perpetually tethered to the what-ifs that linger like ghosts over the town of New Brunswick. The evidence, too muddied, too mishandled, too absent, ensures that definitive answers remain out of reach. The Hall Mills murders stand as a haunting testament to a time when a community's silence, a police force's alleged corruption, and a family's influence could conspire to obscure justice, leaving behind an unsolved mystery that continues to captivate and frustrate a century later. It asks us, even today, what happens when the very system designed to protect us is itself compromised? And what does it say about a society that allows such powerful questions to remain forever unanswered?